This is Gene Quinn. Thank you for joining us this week on IPWatchdog Unleashed. This week, our guest is Tim Pohlmann, and Tim serves as the Managing Director for the Americas at LexisNexis Intellectual Property Solutions. And before he joined LexisNexis, he was for a decade the owner, founder, CEO of IPLytics, which is well, I'll let him tell us what it specifically was and what he's specifically doing. But essentially, Tim has worked in the standard essential patent space for a very long time. He has a PhD, and his dissertation was focused on patenting and coordinating in standardization. And he identified some challenges with the data that was available with respect to 4G, 5G, Wi-Fi, et cetera, and started IPLytics to kind of fill that void. And I know, Tim, you've always been an advocate of more transparency, and that's really been your focus. Thank you for joining us here today.
Thank you, Gene, for having me, and very happy to be here.
Good. So why don't we start with just tell us where you're doing now, where you're at now, and maybe a little bit more even about how you got there. I mean, I know your story a little bit because I've known each other for a while, but what are you working on currently with LexisNexis?
Yeah, so I think my career really was always about data, right? Finding information, as you said, I'm promoting transparency, finding information of the world of patents, the world of standards, the world of standard essential patents, the world of patent pools. And that business really was IPLytics, where we put all that data together. And that 2 years ago, LexisNexis Intellectual Property acquired us, right? And then, of course, I joined a team of IP and data experts that had solutions that go way beyond. And of course, that's also how my role over the years now expanded. As you said in the intro, I'm managing now the Americas. That means we're selling our 8 LexisNexis Intellectual Property solutions in the Americas, 8 products that deal with claim drafting, IP, lawyer management solutions, search, advanced analytics, patent valuation, patent classification, and of course, IPLytics, the SEP data tool.
So you've expanded quite a bit from where IPLytics was then for your portfolio, I guess, right?
Yes, I think that's also one of the things. IPLytics started with basically selling to the those companies that work on standardized technologies, like the large patent owners, the SEP owners that filed all these 4G, 5G patents. But of course, the world has evolved. Connectivity went beyond the telecommunications sector, and our customer base now is much wider, right? Of course, we sell into the automotives, we're selling into, I think, almost all smartphone and computer manufacturers, but also more and more into new industry verticals, the smart meter providers, the broadcasting video service providers, the companies that basically develop any kind of smart device that somehow connects or use video coding or audio coding technologies, and therefore have some kind of a need for data and information on patents and standards.
Uh-huh. So let me just ask you a question. As CEO founder to CEO founder, do you find that as your portfolio has expanded and you've gotten more responsibilities, that it takes you away from what got you into the business in the first place, and you sometimes miss how, which at the time may have seemed like a little drudgery after a while, because you're focusing on such a, not a small piece, but you're focusing on an important piece, but much smaller in scope, and you can really dive in. And then as your portfolio grows, I mean, I know, I'll speak for myself. I know as IP Watchdog has grown, I've had less and less time to do a lot of the things that really got me into it in the first place. And it's fun, but I sometimes wish I had more time to focus on other things. So do you have that experience too?
Oh yeah, that very much resonates. I mean, there's 2 things to it. Of course, being the founder of a startup and building your own team, you're your own president. It's your own universe. You still have that, of course, with your company, Gene. That is a cultural shift I had to learn, being now part of a very large corporation with reporting structures and all these budgeting and numbers crunching. That is different, of course. but also, of course, with regards to what I do and what my passion is. I mean, my whole career build on the SEP work, right? And that's of course expanded now wider, right? I mean, it's still patent data, right? I'm still talking to a lot of IP professionals, but it's less and less, of course, what I started with. And I 100% miss that focus sometimes. I agree.
Hmm.
You know, I have also my own podcast that I'm less and less have time for, which is 100% focused on SEPs. And, you know, that is one of my passions that I had to kind of pause for a while to keep up with all the other stuff.
Yeah, and that was one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you specifically. Not because we're not friends or anything, and it would be a great conversation. But I think you and I are going through some similar stuff, and I also know you had your podcast and it's very successful, and it's kind of you to say that I'm still in charge of my company, but I love Renee very much, and hopefully she won't listen to this episode. But sometimes I just let her run the business. I try and stay focused on the IP part of the business, but it does, the more you grow and the more you get into and the more you do, it does take you away from that which maybe your first love, I guess is the way to say it.
Yeah.
uh,
And it's content, right? I mean, I was always about, I developed that product. I'm the subject matter expert on the data.
mm,
Nowadays I care about budgets and numbers and, you know, who should be in that team and who should overlook this one. And that is really different, right? And I do miss, I mean, I do still do that, but a lot less, obviously. I would
mm,
love to be much more involved sometimes in building the product further and expanding it. I'm more like, now, you know, putting people in charge to do it. I overlook it.
mhm.
I mean, we have great talented people. We have more, you know, resources now. That is also, of course, also different. So we can have more dedicated teams to do things. But of course, I have to let them do it, and I can't be hands-on anymore. And that I do miss a lot.
Yeah, it's probably more about relationships, it seems, at least in my experience, than it is the hands-on. And it's just a different experience.
It is. I think it's a shift. I mean, I'm also, I think it's also good things with it. I mean, when you're a single founder, CEO, you have a lot of responsibilities on your shoulders. You have to make a lot
Mhm,
of decisions by yourself. There's a lot of risk to it. Of course, now I have also colleagues that have sometimes even more experience than I have with things. I can learn more. I have people that, you know, tell me how to do things, and you know, I can basically understand, you know, how the bigger picture works in a bigger organization. So there's good and bad things, but it's definitely a cultural shift. I mean,
it's a shift. Yeah,
that's a shift. Yeah.
it definitely a shift. And the thing with also, what would be nice, and one of the good things I expect is, as a CEO and founder, at the end of the day, it all falls on you to make it happen. And if you don't know how to do something, you just have to figure out how to do it. So if you have a little bit of a bigger team, the odds are somebody will have been there, done that before. And is there anything that is surprising to you that maybe, and the reason I ask this question, and the way think that this is very interesting, is I think that there is a different mentality a lot of times from somebody who starts their own company and grows it and takes risk and does, out of necessity, does it all, and then you go into a company and you think you know what you're going to be walking into, but it's a much larger, more mature, more established company. Was there anything there that surprised you, uh, that you just, and you look back and you're like, well, probably should have known that, but I didn't, because I just never had that experience.
I think one thing that surprised me, I mean, I always, my style of managing people was always in ways of, I convinced people. I thought I had the answer and I convinced people that this is how we should do it. And I was open to other opinions, right? I had a very open
Hmm.
door policy. But I felt at least that in our company, we basically all work towards the same thing. And, you know, when I thought this should need focus, then everyone thought too. Or they told me, no, we should wait. But anyhow, I think it was more like, we all came to conclusions. But in the bigger organizations, it is different. It's about reporting structures. So you go to someone, he works on something super interesting, and then you say, "Oh, this is great. Can you help me with this?" And then you say, "No, well, I have to talk to my manager." It's like,
Yeah.
okay, but isn't that exciting? Shouldn't we do that? Yeah, well, we should, but there are rules to it, and there are budgets associated, and I'm busy with this. So and when IPLytics got integrated, suddenly all these, we had like 35 people, they were like distributed into other teams, so they wouldn't report to me anymore. So even my own people were like busy with things that I. So, and this is, of course, I mean, this is professional. This is how it works professionally. I understand that, but it was weird sometimes that people would not do what I thought we should do
Mhm.
anymore, but they're suddenly in other teams and they have a different report and they work on even a new product. And those are things that I totally underestimated. I thought, I mean, naively probably, that it's, we're all gonna, work towards that same direction, and if I say something, people will listen and probably still do it. But of course that's different, right? And yeah,
Yeah, it
that's the
is.
reality.
It's just a different animal, and anybody who's lived through that uh, knows how different it is. But it's good to see that you. It seems like you're succeeding. Seems like you're out there doing well, and SEPs are an area where it's only gets more and more interesting. Maybe an open ended question on that, and we'll just see where we go with it. Is what do you think the current state of SEPs around the world is? I know it's open ended; it's intended so you could take it whichever direction you want to go in. But there's a lot going on all around the world, and it never stays the same for very long. It seems.
Indeed. I think the topic has evolved. It also increased, of course, in importance, which was always good for us. But I think in interesting dimensions. I think what I'm increasingly impressed with in the past years is how creative our industry got into building new, products, or building new licensing models, or coming up with new ideas of how to make this work. And with all these complications and these, challenges going on, that really impressed me, because there's so much innovation in our space.
Mhm.
I'm not talking about innovation with the actual technology, like more 5G, 4G, that too, but how to deal with the whole SEP licensing, right? And I think that impressed me very much. Um, I think, of course, what still is something fascinating, if you think about the standards organization that develops for 5G and soon 6G, it's called the 3GPP. And I heard a professor once saying this is probably the largest open innovation group in the world, and it's probably true. Like, some of the strongest R&D companies put the best engineers to go to these meetings, and these companies, they're coming from the US, they're coming from Europe, they're coming from China, Korea, Japan, anywhere in the world. But of course, now today we have a world that is increasingly, challenging that, right? This international collaboration with our geopolitical tensions, right? And there's we can argue there's some kind of like a trade war going on between the United States and China. There's other complications of supply chains across our globe, and we still have that open innovation group, the 3GPP, where all these international experts meet. And I think that is something that is increasingly a topic that is much bigger than just SEP licensing. It's national interest to own patents for 5G, for infrastructure that allows communication. And that's I think presidents talk about it now, right? I think not maybe specifically about SEPs, but they talk about connectivity and how
Mhm.
important it is. And whoever controls that has control over the world of communication. And I think that is a shift that I found it fascinating, a little bit scary at the same time, of course. But that's something I think that will more and more also include discussions that you have at your events,
Yep.
Gene, that I have in our webinars and whatever we do, that there's more to it than just the licensing.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot to it. There's national security implications. There's economic security implications. There's and then there's all kinds of consequences for various companies, of course, individually, and a lot of these companies are, yeah, they fly an American flag over their headquarters, or they fly a Chinese flag over their headquarters, but they do business everywhere. They're everywhere, which makes it even more complicated at times, because they have to keep a couple different governments happy with what they're doing. And China and the US, for better or for worse, a lot of times in this space don't see eye to eye with dealing with innovation, which shouldn't be shocking. It's not a negative commentary. We're competitors. We want in the US to have our companies dominate. They in China want their companies to dominate. That's just the natural order, really. But it does lead to some tension sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's the problem. I think the companies themselves, they for them it's critical, right? I think they you can only sell your products globally if you want to be successful. The standard has to be globally the same, right? If we start, having a US 5G and a China 5G, that'd be the end of innovation, and the companies know that, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's the big challenge, to overcome this tension by providing, or making governments understand. I mean, we're providing something to economy. This is growth. This is, this will make us all richer, right?
Mm,
If we stop that, we'll all have to cut down on our salaries, and having more and more and more, right? I think, and that's something governments have to understand, that they have to keep this to a certain level.
yeah. Yeah, so there's a lot here I want to ask you, but maybe since we're right kind of here and we're talking about the interplay between the U.S. and China, international companies everywhere. What do you think about artificial intelligence? I mean, it seems to me that it's such an immature area right now, and just this week, earlier this week when from where we're recording this, there was news about the Chinese coming out with a really advanced artificial intelligence system that has some people scared, some people hopeful, some people optimistic, but it's shaking things up for sure. And it seems to me that we're not yet in a place where there would be, I think, any rush to standardization in AI, because everybody is still trying to dominate the world at this point. But it strikes me that if we're really going to get out of AI the promise that is being made, there's going to have to be standardization, just for the same reason you were just talking about. You can't have 5G in the US be different than 5G in Europe, be different than 5G in China, because you're not going to carry 3 phones around with you. And if you want to really have AI that affects people's lives and makes innovation faster, better, cheaper, safer, uh, people are going to have to be playing by the same rules to some extent, I would think. What do you think?
Yeah, no, it's a super interesting topic to get into. I think it's super dynamic. I mean, if a Chinese startup, really, I mean, this is not even an established company,
Mhm.
is basically cutting stock market values of large US chip manufacturers down to what, 10-20%.
Yeah.
This is pretty dynamic, and we see that, there's no market leader yet, and there's different players, and there probably will be other players joining this, right? I mean, if it's so dynamic, I think there's still a lot of things that will move forward. I think standardization is always great in areas where the standard, basically people agreeing to one standard, enables innovation on top, right? And I think that is an
Mhm.
area for AI still to identify, because of course we don't want to regulate, right? We don't want to
Right.
put frame to it. I think there's a lot of standards that make sense to me in with regards to, what kind of data you should or could use. How can we somehow define certain standards of what information in those AI tools and what they spit out is true or not, right? I mean,
Mhm.
today you can ask 3 AI tools, you have a question, and they may come up with different answers,
Right.
but there may be still one truth. And of course, you can imagine that certain AI tools may also influence your number with political interest, right? So there have to be standards around that, right? Because otherwise, the word fake news becomes fake AI, right? I mean, they give you on purpose certain answers that may influence your decision. So there's a lot of topics, I think, around that are super exciting. Ethical data protection, right? There's so much things we can think of, but for me it's still very dynamic, almost like a black box. I mean, the technology itself, I mean, I work now for a super large data company, is exciting to be integrated into all our solutions. That is definitely going to create more growth for us,
Mhm.
but at the same time we also sometimes fear it will overtake what we do, right? Maybe AI assistant can do more than our interface can today, and maybe we should focus on different areas. So I think the dynamic of this, and I think the unpredictability of what it will become, is what scares people. It's an opportunity, but at the same time, it's always a threat, right? What will be replaced by AI, right? We don't know
Right.
that yet. Maybe you don't even need a podcast, you and I here, right? Maybe we can just spit in some input, and then they make up a podcast interview, and we're not needed anymore.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how people respond to that because, and I don't know whether you had this experience in Germany, but in the U.S. Over the holiday season, Coca-Cola came out with some commercials that were AI generated commercials, and it didn't really particularly bother me, but I understand that in reading it bothered a lot of people. That was not particularly well received, where usually the Coca-Cola holiday commercials are just everybody feels good and happy. They have polar bears and big rig trucks with Coca-Cola and snow scenes, and but it struck people the wrong way. And I have you seen any of that kind of back I guess backlash is the way to call it, in Europe to AI?
Yeah, I think to a similar extent. I think we've seen. I mean, I know there's some influencers on social media that are AI now. They
Mhm.
have thousands of followers because they can predict who should follow them. And I have a couple of friends actually in Germany that are in the advertising industry, and they're super scared. I mean, if you think how expensive a commercial production like Coca-Cola is, and how many people are involved, and that you need to shoot those videos, and people are cutting those, and you need to wait for a good day to shoot it. If you can do that now with maybe a fraction of the investment and come up with probably a very similar product, that is scary.
Yeah.
I think it will touch probably every industry and aspect of it, because it can do things that suddenly are are so cheap, and considerably less cost, that people really fear, what am I doing here, right? Am I even needed for this? And same with us. I mean, our whole marketing now, we run that often through AI, and we had copywriters, like, we haven't been using much lately, like external contractors. And I also felt sorry, like, you probably don't even need those guys anymore. I mean, you can have a great copywriter AI assisted, right? And you just have to know what you want to say, and you have to have some idea about the outcome is good or not. So you need someone still to overlook it, but I think it makes things much faster and easier to use.
Yeah, that's one of the things I hear a lot of people who are talking about these issues and thinking about these issues, for example, from like government agencies and think tanks and so forth, really worry about what it's going to do to employment. And it's probably going to, a lot of people are probably going to lose jobs. And um, historically there will be other opportunity, right? Innovation doesn't generally result in a net negative for jobs, although it may result in a net negative for any one individual or a particular group of people, but other opportunities arise. And I think there's some people questioning whether that is going to be true with AI, and time will tell, I suppose. But one thing you said about regulation, generally, I'm not in favor of a lot of regulation. Well, I think light touch regulation probably works the best. But I would be perfectly fine if every government in the world regulated AI in that they adopted Isaac Asimov's three laws or three rules for robots, which is the first one is a robot cannot harm a human being. So if we could put that into the AI coding and mandate that, and then the second law is that the robots must follow human orders. Those two things I think are extremely important, and we're probably not terribly close to AI ruling the world, but people are afraid sometimes, and maybe it's just people I talk to who are a little bit more knowledgeable about science fiction are afraid. Do you see that kind of fear in people, or caution maybe is the better way to say it?
Yeah, I think for good reasons, as you say. I mean, it's there have to be rules. There have to be limits to what the AI can do. As you can say, you call for a standard, the security standard, safety standards. I 100% believe we have to. I wonder sometimes if we will be fast enough coming up with all these things,
Yeah.
because AI is taking over so quickly. I mean, if we think about, you know, when first ChatGPT came on the market, it's not long ago, right? And I think that the development right now is the dynamic we see. Are we even able to keep up with that and come up with all our regulation and standards? in time, right? I think that's something I wonder sometimes because we're a little slow on that side of things, right?
Yeah, that's being kind. I mean, we're still in the SEP telecommunications area litigating issues dealing with 4G. And 5G is now, and their 6G is, I don't know exactly when 6G will be widely available, but like we're a couple generations beyond where the litigation actually continues to reside. So to think that we're going to get ahead of AI in any meaningful way just seems crazy to me. And there's so much in the standard essential patent space that still is uncertain. Like, what does it mean to be an unwilling licensee, for example? Well, it probably depends upon what country you're litigating in and what the judges think and what their experiences are. And so I agree. There's a lot of questions to be asked about AI, and we still don't have a lot of answers in a lot of critical areas for the well-known, well-established technologies that are currently existing.
I think one problem I see with people, what they often want is a very clear and definite answer, right? And that's true for SEP licensing, where some people ask me, now, what is FRAND? What is that rate? What is the number? And people don't like thinking about this as ranges, even though it's the answer, but people don't like that, right? I mean, that is then, that creates, again, an uncertainty. But I mean, I've been in data my life, and also data is never, I mean, the one truth, right? It's an indicator. It gives you some transparency in some areas, but there's a lot of intransparency still in other areas. So we have to get used to maybe answers that are not always giving you, everything, but just
Mhm.
something that we can start working with. And then we have to figure out the rest, right? And I think we kind of have to have trust in the system and trust in that people are doing the right thing, and everything else is a trade-off. If you want to go out and litigate, it's expensive, right? You want to do that, or try to solve your SEP agreement bilaterally, or go through a pool. And on the other hand, too, if you're an implementer and you feel the price is too high, and if you can afford litigating, then do that. But you always have to have a good understanding of what the trade-offs are. And if we can at least give some indication of both parties, with some data saying, hey guys, maybe that litigation is not worth it, you're never going to pay that price, or you're never going to get to that point. I think we have achieved something, but again, it will never be the truth. And I think that is also what the wrong idea of regulators are. They think the system is broken because there's no one truth. But we will never get to that transparency, right? We will never have that level, no matter how we regulate, right? We had just recently a German court and the UPC deciding on essentiality of a patent supposed to be essential to the G standard. One court says it is essential, the other court says no, it's not. Two courts with
Mhm.
evidence, with experts, with a lot of money involved, right? So even two courts can have two answers to one question. And I think that sums up a little bit the situation of where we're in. This is never going to be, there's never going to be one system that is going to be perfect. And I think people need to accept that
Yeah.
that reality.
Do you think that that's a feature or a bug? And where I'm going with that is so much of the SEP area has, so in my experience, seems to have so much more to do with doing business, negotiating, getting deals done than it does the law. The law is kind of, like the playing pieces on the board, but the business is the strategy. And it feels to me that a lot of times neither party really wants to know whether these patents are essential or not. Neither party wants to know whether these patents are valid or not. Neither party wants to tell what deals they've done. And it seems all of that, it would be advantageous for a system that is business focused, because then it's about the deal, the art of the deal, or the negotiating the deal, and rather than the law, where in the law we want it to be certain and everybody knows the rules, and then you can have transactions that are make sense and fair across the board. And it just seems like the business mentality dominates SEPs more than a legal mentality.
It does. I mean, if people ask me really what FRAND is, and I keep saying it's two parties closing a deal. That's how simple it is,
Right.
right? I mean, if two parties agree on a price, then that's fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory because those parties have negotiated and it came to a conclusion, right?
Mm.
Um, and I think that is also the problem. The world has changed faster than our minds and our systems, right? Suddenly, industries that never heard about SEPs are in the middle of a SEP negotiation. It's a cultural new thing to do for them. They were not used to it. They thought, you need a truth and the answer, and they said, "I'm only licensing only essential patents, so give me all the only essential patents." While in the end, actually, what you want is a much broader license to anything that ever is becoming essential, and you want to be covered for the next 5 years. So it's exactly not what you want. So and that to create in their people's head how this works needs time, right? I think now we've solved things in the SAP world, maybe for the automotives, but the next industries are up on the horizon, and we see the same mistakes repeat. The same people,
Mhm.
call for that truth about what is SAP and what isn't, and they will also have to learn the hard way that's not how it works. And I think that is something. Again, I think technology was faster than our industry and our professionals and our courts, maybe even, to understand what the dynamics are. And I think that will continue. And I think I would love to have a little bit more flexibility in people's mind that the things you've been doing for 20 years one way may be different today because the world has changed and your product has changed. You are now in a different market. And I think that's something that especially implementers have to learn. But on the other hand, I also think the SAP owners could have been a little bit more educative and think about, this is a whole new um, this is a whole new industry. We can't just go in and do the same thing we've done for years with all the phone makers. We have to get them to it. And also, I think they were not really thinking about it, ahead of time to do that well. So I think both sides of the table had some cultural clashes to overcome to get to something that makes sense. And I would fully agree. It's a feature, right? I mean, it's people
Mhm.
negotiate. It's no truth. There's no one rate. There's no one standardized contract. Um,
Well,
you have to.
there's no one way to look at it, right? Like just with the friend, whenever I talk about a friend rate, and I talk about that with people, and some people are fine talking about it in terms of a rate, and then other people in the industry are like, well, it's not a rate. Stop saying that. It's not a, there's a lot of, and I get it. I understand. I get that. There's a lot of things that go into this deal. It's a negotiation, and it's a relationship in a large part. Like which patents do you want? Which patents do you need? Which parts of the standard are you using? How many of what percentage of our portfolio could possibly be on that? And then how big are you? How many are you gonna need? How many units are you gonna need? Because bulk discounting is just something everybody is familiar. I mean, if you go into Costco, go to a wholesale warehouse, right? For a consumer knows if you buy more, you get a better price, right? So there's a lot that goes into it. But on the other side of the equation, being a business owner, I know a lot of times people are approaching me and say, "Oh, we have this great tool, we have this great service, we have this great whatever it is, and the first question that goes through my mind after, if it's something that I think I might be able to use or need, is well, how much? Because if you want to charge me $100,000 a month, I can tell you definitively right now the answer is no. If you can tell me it's like $1 a month, I can tell you definitively yes. So there is a threshold at which the price is like, or a range of prices can be relevant to help know whether it's time to roll up your sleeves and sit down and negotiate or do something else. And even that reality, you can't always get people in the industry to agree to that. And then the other thing that came up in my mind when you were talking, and we've talked about this a lot, and this I think was something IPLytics really got into doing for a while, is, well, what part of the portfolio that you own is actually standard? And it's tough because standards mean you're putting the technology in front of the body to consider and adopt before anything is adopted. So standard essential patents include those things that never wind up making it into the standard, or at least currently don't make it into the standard. And I get people not wanting to pay for stuff that didn't make it into the standard, but I also, there's so it's a really complicated issue, right? And and I don't know where that's going, but I think what it is it's there's a business deal to be done in almost all occasions where a lot of people can make a lot of money, and I think too often that's missed.
Yeah. No, 100%. I mean, I think what we always try to do, I mean, I understand, of course, sometimes from the implementer perspective, someone comes to you, wants money, and you kind of have to report back to your CFO. I mean, that person will not be the only one that wants money. There will be others that want
Right.
money. And how much are we in total going to end up paying? So they want that price as you want for the service provider that come to you. They want that aggregate royalty, what people talk about. And I think that's a fair ask, but it doesn't mean that we need an aggregate royalty to start with and going from there, right? And I think that's what the regulators misunderstood. We can't start with a price point because it's a market, and a market can't work with a fixed price that someone came up with. That, I mean, I don't even know what economist should make that study, what that price should be. So what we at IPLytics did is we told these implementers, you know, there are all these different reference points. There's a pool there. You know, some companies license through the pool. There's some court rulings that show that a certain portfolio was valued per patent a certain dollar amount. There's this economic study maybe also that came out with a price point. And now there's this company that approaches you that they have a portfolio. We can tell you how large it is, what their share is on the total stack of all patents for that particular standard. And then you take all these other reference points, and then you have some price ranges, right? You will probably know that you end up paying $2 to $3 for Wi-Fi, right? I mean, it can't be more precise, but I can tell you it's in that range. And that, surprisingly, was already something they could work with, because they before really had no clue about, could it be really $10 maybe,
Right.
because all these patent assertion that these guys come after me. And I think that is often also underestimated, that even some indication of a price of an aggregate royalty, it doesn't have to be one number that everyone builds up, works down and then we just appropriate. That is, I think, something that often has been misunderstood, that even some indication, even some reference points can help these companies agree something, right? Because they just fear to be paying too much and their competitors get a better deal. And the first license agreement they sign will define all the price of the other agreements they're about to sign in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So they're super scared about that uncertainty. And I think that is a part where I can think we can at least contribute. But I think it's so complex that the conclusions from these problems often were wrong, right? I mean, the conclusion is not we have to set a price now. We just need more reference point. We need a little bit more transparency here,
More information. Oh, it's
more
always
information.
beneficial, you know.
Yeah,
And it's it strikes me as odd that that's something that more people don't get, you know. And I mean, even just from the fear of entering into an agreement. I mean, one of the big fears for a lot of these companies is they don't know, because all the agreements are confidential. They wind up being confidential. So I don't know what you paid. I don't know what other competitors paid, but I know I need to be competitive, and I can't pay more than what you're paying, or at least not substantially more. Now, if you got a bulk discount that I can't approach, I think a lot of people understand that part of it. But I got to be in the ballpark. Otherwise, the minute I sign the deal, I'm no longer competitive, and it's just going to go all away. And so that's one thing that I think has been really challenging. The other thing that now, and I don't know whether you have thoughts on this or not, but the federal circuit is about ready to consider in the patent licensing area whether an expert can use lump sum payments as information to inform a royalty based calculation. And the argument is, well, lump sum is not royalty. Okay, well, we got that, we know that, but the lump sum, when you just as pure business, when you're looking, okay, if I'm going to pay you a lump sum today, then I'm going to get the right to do X, Y, and Z in the future. Well, how much of X, Y, and Z am I going to be able to do? And that's going to inform me as a business owner what I can pay you up front. And I'll probably want a bit of a deduction if I'm paying all up front than if I pay little by little over time. But it sets bookends, right? So how could it, any information, useful information, relevant information, maybe not the information, not the conclusion, but how could relevant information to professionals not be something that could be used as evidence? It strikes me as just bizarre.
I agree. And I mean, there's whole businesses and expert witnesses business built around unpacking these lump sums. I mean, there's really very intelligent people that go into this with assumptions. And again, they don't come up with one answer, they come up with a range. But I think only because it's a lump sum, it doesn't mean it can be unpacked. It can be a reference point. It can be, and I think I'm an economist. I always think about incentives. I mean, there's a reason why we see so many lump sum agreements, because there are people that on purpose don't want this to be a rate,
Right.
right? I mean, because it sets precedents.
Yeah, they
And
don't want it to form the future.
right, and I understand that also. We need some flexibility,
Mhm.
but why not unpack one of these lump sums and see? This is probably the assumptions they had. We have data on shipments of products. We have data on the revenue those companies make with those products. We can unpack it, right? We know how much probably per product they've paid, even though again maybe not this dollar price, but it's going to be a range. And we may also understand some paid more, some paid less, and maybe this is a agreement that we can compare with that agreement or not, right? So I think that whole industry is there. There are very intelligent people working on it. I've seen super interesting economic analysis on this that I found fascinating, of how they broke down the numbers. But again, they never come up with one price. They come up with a range, they come up with reference points, but that can really that can yield deals, right? This goes, this actually resolves disputes, those kind of work. And I think it should definitely remain a reference point in the market.
Well, absolutely. I mean, because if you use one set of assumptions and models to come up with a range, and I use another set of assumptions and models to come up with a range, they should they shouldn't be diametrically opposite, right? And oftentimes they're maybe they overlap, maybe they abut, but they're not usually diametrically opposite, and it can set bookends on both sides. And when I used to litigate, it was often that the judge would right before you're about ready to pick a jury, and they're trying to say, do we really need to do this? Are you sure? Is there a deal? I had a judge one time tell me, I want you both to write on a piece of paper what's your lowest number and what's your highest number. And then if and I won't tell you what it said, other than I'll tell you whether I think you should spend the evening trying to come to a deal before we pick the jury tomorrow morning, you know? And what you're trying to do is see, are you both in the same ballpark? Are you both, and if you're using similar or same information, you should be close, or at least able to come to a business negotiation, a resolution. And that's what's frightening to me. And I fear the federal circuit is going to say that this lump sum data is not appropriate to be used for royalty calculations, which just seems to fly in the face of everything we hear in the industry, which is the industry needs more transparency. Well, if you're taking away things that people can consider legitimately, that's not more transparency.
No.
No.
Okay, it's the opposite. It's going to be the opposite. Yeah, that's really, yeah, worrisome to hear that. I think yeah, as you said, any reference point helps. And I think and I also understand, in any deal you on purpose start with a very high or very low number on purpose to
Mm-hmm.
get closer to what you actually want. But if you have like real reference points in the market, then you're getting closer, because otherwise why would one or the other party get closer to each other? And then if it's always the middle, it's getting further away and further away, because if we assume, oh, the judge is going to just say, oh, we meet in the middle, then I'm targeting even higher, right? And that doesn't resolve in any good deal, right?
Yeah. So I appreciate you having this conversation with me, and I know we're abutting the hour that uh, the time that we said that I would take you to. But before we get there, I want to ask you about what you're working on now. You kind of went through the list at the beginning, but what is it that is really getting your creative juices flowing? Is there anything, whether it's SEP related, or just maybe more broadly economics related, or broadly more data related, but like, if you didn't have to be running a business unit right now, what part of your portfolio is the piece that excites you the most for the future?
Right. I mean, I think, I'm my whole career I built on my topic of standard essential patents, and that still excites me the most because it's still a highly dynamic, changing world, right? And
Mhm.
I find it fascinating of how standards are used in different use cases for different purposes, and we all will understand that the licensing of patents will have to follow the use case and not a strict model of how things have been, working in the smartphone world. You can't license a smartphone manufacturer same as a smart meter manufacturer. There's more and more IoT use cases coming up. What excites me is that I firsthand see that I think, closed like 3 deals in the healthcare business world without naming anyone, but they now have SEP data. Why would a large healthcare man,
Yeah.
those things excite me. I want to hear from these customers and, people that use our data now, why and for what reason, and what is their use case, and who is approaching them for what products. We have an air conditioner company just signed up, right? So this is exciting. When we started, it was like the obvious. I mean, we knew who to sell to, and we kind of chased those people. But now there's more surprises coming up, and I think that's super exciting to see how we can support these companies that have very little understanding of the world of SEP licensing and standardization, but they
Mhm.
realize it's integrated in their products. They need to be prepared. They need data to understand the world. And it excites me to talk to those people and understand their needs, and how our space really evolves, because obviously we don't see, when these SEP owners send out all their letters, right? We don't see that. There's new pool programs coming up, but the bilateral thing is always, behind closed doors, and that is super exciting. I think on a larger scale, I think, that with all the products that I now have to bring to the market, it's all about how can data enable, your decision making in making better decisions, actually, right? And I think, it is exciting. It's kind of like a very broad thing to say, and we always talk about IP should be more in the boardroom, and all these kind of discussions have been going on for 10 years. But I think data more and more becomes a communication tool where you can really communicate, let's say, the value of your portfolio, or that you are ahead of time with your technology compared to others, and put some information and some actual, tangible information and data to it. And I think getting that into people's mind of what data can enable and help them help their own position in the company, but also help them strategically to build a company that is set for the future, is, I think, it's on a higher level now. What excites me to, work with leaders, work with chief IP officers, chief licensing managers, and understand their pain points and challenges better, and how we can help with data, right? And I think that is an exciting thing. And there's still a lot of, things we can't help with, which may be fruit for ideas for future companies to come. But I think that's still a space that can, that can see a lot of change. And I think I am myself, I'm very data driven in decisions. I like to look at numbers and validate these, even though that we don't always have the data for it. But especially in IP, which is such a complex world, I think there's a lot more we can do. And that this is really the thing that I'm working on right now, thinking about how can we get into people's head the idea that data can really support what they do.
Yeah, because if you really know what's going on, you can just make better informed decisions. You can feel more confident about them. You probably can get the deal done sooner, and if you can get the deal done sooner in business, then you're making more money. And yeah, I'm a big fan of data. I'm not as big a fan of data in like football, for example, where like I don't know that the AI may or may not know that on the last play my offensive lineman twisted his knee, so maybe we won't be going for it on fourth down. Um, but when you're looking at data, it really can validate you in a lot of ways, what you're thinking, what you're feeling. And then also, if you are going to like that, like we're going to deviate from the data says we should go for it on 4th and 2 in this situation. Well, if you don't go for it, now you got to really articulate a real reason for yourself to justify that. And it helps all around for a variety of different ways.
Again, yeah, even if in football, if there's an AI suggesting you to now run, and don't go for throwing the ball, then then it's probably also still a likelihood, right? And I think if you want to surprise the other side that probably uses the same AI, maybe you have to think out of the box too. But I think data can always give you likelihoods and indicators and signals that may influence you, but may not be the only one, reason you do things. And I would never recommend people just trusting the data, right? 100%. But I mean, we had recently that customer that basically had a hard time because the business wasn't doing well, but they had this patent portfolio, and um, he was looking for investors, and then we talked that person into a lower discounted price to use the data for it, and he really went with that and used our indicators to show to investors, to finance people, hey, we have a technology here that is set for the future. Business is not doing well right now, but why don't you give us a loan based on the value of those patents? And then they got that loan, the business up and running again. And I mean, I don't know to what extent our data was helping with that, right? I mean, of course, we know there's a lot more due diligence. There's probably really engineers reading those patents and claims and make sure they're valid and they secure the products they're selling. But I think, when I hear these stories, I think that's exciting. Like IP is a space that, we have an asset that clearly often has a value. But of course, you need to convince someone of that value, right? It's not even you to know that it has a value. It's for external people to know. And who is your source of truth for that, right? And any expert who looks at your patent that you pay is your own expert, right? They come in on the due diligence, but that's very expensive. So I think data can at least bridge that gap of, I know you have patents, but I don't know if they're worth anything, right? And we all know a patent can be really worthless. And some patents can be super worthy, right? So that's we have that range of value in patents. So I think that is, it can really create growth in the market and appreciation for technology and value of patents.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of more data, particularly in today's day and age where you have the tools to be able to help you sift through the data and see the insights. I mean, back even just a few years ago, certainly 10 years ago, it was just a wave of data over top of you. And that's not helpful. It's just overwhelming. But when you have the tools to be able to layer together, then that's when insights happen. And I say it all the time, and I'm sure you've heard me say, that gives us lawyers the opportunity to do what we really went to law school to do, which was to be a lawyer, to be persuasive, to be an advocate, and have something backing up what we're saying, rather than just pounding the table and shouting louder when things aren't going our way. So, well, thanks a lot, Tim. This has been a great conversation. I look forward to publishing it to the audience, and I wish you continued good luck.
Thank you, Gene. Thank you for having me, and thank you for listening in to the podcast. It was a great session. Thanks for the conversation.